Alcohol, cigarettes, a project of marketers, which seems harmful, but we are presented with it as if it is possible, but in small quantities. This is what marketers catch us on, and corporations make millions. And we don't even think about why. The most popular products are sold and how they affect us, and nothing terrible happened. You didn't become a drug addict. You didn't end up behind bars. Your life didn't collapse. You don't suffer from any addiction. So, it turns out, addiction is a fiction? But why then do completely defenseless things spoil the lives of most of us? Sweets, social networks, games, pornography. And for some of us, these things can spoil worse than some products. How does it work? Today you will learn how it works. How does addiction really work? Why does our brain become a hostage to its weaknesses? Does it again and again? And why is this process practically impossible to stop? How are bad habits formed? What influences it? And why are each of us addicted? The average person knows almost nothing about addiction, except that it is bad. But why? Because it is much deeper than just a passion for products or habits. It is not just a desire to go to a porn site or smoke a cigarette. It is a complex, unique, individual process, and sometimes even useful. It affects both our brain and physiology and the psyche, often intertwined with life experience and internal needs. So what is addiction and how does it work? Addiction is not an ordinary failure, as some think, but an evolutionarily determined mechanism. So it helped our ancestors survive. Imagine that you are an ancient person living in a world of constant threat of hunger and danger. You do not want to die, and therefore your brain is programmed to notice, remember, and repeat what brings pleasure, because pleasure is an incentive to form security and survival. And this pleasure was very difficult to get. So, to get food equivalent to a juicy and high-calorie burger, an ancient person would have needed hours, or even weeks, of gathering and hunting, kilometers of chasing game, fighting with it, and then processing and cooking. And sugar, which is now stuffed almost everywhere, did not exist then. So it turned out that an ancient person fought for his daily calorie allowance, fought for life, and underwent great physical exertion. And a modern person can hold his gadget in one hand, watch videos with hundreds of girls, and in the other order food delivery on his phone, the volume of which an ancient man could use to bury his entire family. Progress has occurred, and what we needed is now very accessible. You can get pleasure literally in a couple of clicks. We live in an era of hyperstimulation, where instead of rare prey, we have endless access to sugar, social networks, games, and other doses. The brain did not have time to adapt to these conditions. It was not ready for so many stimuli, because it was created for life in conditions of scarcity. Therefore, our internal mechanisms and the brain are used to stocking up on it, using it to the maximum. It does not distinguish between what is good and what is bad. The main thing for it is to achieve its goal, to get pleasure. But at what price is not so important. Therefore, you want more delicious food, more stimuli, because this is your evolutionary meaning. But when there are a little too many stimuli, tolerance is formed, because the brain believes that now it is commonplace. So, most of you are addicted to social networks, but you do not feel pleasure from them, because this is commonplace in the form of doping, which is not intended for the brain at all. At heart, we are still the same hunter-gatherers who just want to survive, to get a reward. Only now our usual mechanism is working against us. So, many suffer from apathy, depression, and an unsatisfactory life, because the world has changed, and we are only learning to live in this world. But not everyone succeeds. Instead of moving forward, we shoot in search of instant gratification. And what is the result? A job that does not bring joy, low income, lack of prospects, and complete uncertainty about the future. This is not just unpleasant, it is dangerous. We waste time, energy, and the opportunity to change something. Instead of moving forward, we shoot in search of instant gratification. To get out of the vicious circle and start changing, it is important to find an occupation that requires effort, but opens up new horizons. You have to start from scratch. But it's not so scary, because you can learn everything and start changing your life at any time. Any responsibility and habit is a cycle that is started by a certain trigger. For example, boredom or a feeling of loneliness is a trigger. Then comes activity. For example, we open social networks. By scrolling through them, we get temporary relief and joy. a feeling that everything is fine. That is reward. And the brain closes this cycle. It remembers that when it feels bad, it does this and gets better. And the more you repeat this process, the deeper it is fixed in the neurons, forming and now. If the trigger is triggered, you just do it. And that's the problem. In normal life, the pleasure mechanism works on saturation. We satisfy hunger with food and fatigue with sleep. Everything is balanced. But when it's a little too much, we break the balance. The brain gets stuck on the short path to the task. But this path exhausts us. Bad habits create overload, but do not give real satiety. Therefore, the pleasure of pornography, games, drugs quickly turns into a feeling of emptiness. Because our habits, which have become a necessary part of each of you, do not work through the usual synthesis and balance of the body, but through artificial stimulation. They literally suck out your neurotransmitters and then leave you without energy. Useful habits are formed according to the same principle, but work differently. The difference is in which process controls the message. Bad habits are uncontrolled doping, and they stimulate the brain from the outside, giving an instant dopamine surge. And useful ones are a process, like a deal. You do something, for example, play sports, start processes that strengthen the body, make you better. And for the fact that you take care of yourself, you are rewarded with pleasure hormones. And in this exchange, the body itself regulates how much, how, and when to give it to you. Therefore, there are no sharp declines and overloads. Usually, good habits are built on hormesis, on small stresses that make us stronger. A cold shower is stress, but it increases immunity. Sports are a load, but it makes us stronger. Traveling, learning new things is stimulation that forms new neurons and makes the brain more stable. In general, bad habits are an external stimulus, without restrictions, and good ones are an internal reward that is synthesized and regulated by the body itself. That is why bad habits are often built on destructive behavior, and good ones are based on improving ourselves physically and mentally. But when our lifestyle is aimed at improving ourselves, bad habits cease to be harmful due to their limitations. A bottle of Coke once a week perfectly restores after a workout, and a delicious burger or pizza once a couple of weeks will help you relax and have a good time. The main thing is not to upset the balance in the other direction. So addiction is not a weakness, but a biological mechanism that we need, and this is normal. Will you like them? As for cigarettes, our ancestors depended on getting food, interaction, and security, while we are subject to likes, sugar, and virtual achievements. The only difference is that once it saved life, and now it destroys it. However, addiction can be different. It is divided into two types: physical and psychological. Physical means when we significantly exceed our natural norm, literally cross the limit set by our body. We use an amazing substance and instantly malfunctions occur because an external excessive stimulant appears. A gap appears between natural limits and what we feel from using it, and the body gets used to functioning only on doping, turning off or changing the work of its own systems. The body becomes addicted, and the lack of another dose or its insufficiency begins to be interpreted by the brain as a threat to survival. For the body, this is not just a cool high. It is a violation of the chemical balance. And this happens not only from drugs. Even caffeine from tea and coffee affects the brain in a similar way. Caffeine, entering the bloodstream along with coffee or tea, blocks adenosine receptors, which are responsible for fatigue, and therefore we feel a surge of strength. Adenosine receptors begin to work contrary and become more noticeable because caffeine blocks their work. Therefore, giving up, for example, coffee after prolonged use makes us very sleepy and irritable until the receptors resume their work. But it is logical that the power of separation on the work of the brain is simply not comparable. Therefore, in order to completely destroy the brain and even die, you need to drink about 5 liters of espresso in a few hours. But to get an overdose of banned fentanyl, 2 milligrams will be enough. And the stronger the separation, and if physical dependence is a malfunction of the body, then psychological dependence is a malfunction of the mind. It's not about the chemical effect, but about the need to get the desired emotional state. 2. Get rid of apathy, loneliness, to feel more cheerful, confident, or cheerful. In a word, better. And the more unmet needs and complexes and aspirations inside your mind, the more weak points it has, and the more you are prone to addictions. Therefore, for example, coffee for a person becomes not only a tonic drink, but a compensation for the lack of self-confidence, an opportunity to become more cheerful, socially active, and even more interesting, without which a person will be afraid to go out to people. It is psychological addiction, the strongest, that often works together with physical. Because even the strongest physical failure and imbalance will recover sooner or later. But emotional attachment to a state of confidence, euphoria, inspiration, or control will not allow us to do this. Because we depend not so much on stimuli as on states, even negative ones. We can miss bad relationships because we miss the feeling of love. We can also depend on anxiety. Constantly going through negative scenarios, reading the news, we feel that we are in control of the situation. It can be due to suffering, unhappiness, expectation of pity, attention, care, because it is in this state that we feel at least some kind of emotional boost. There are many true reasons, but they are, of course, deeply hidden inside us, and this needs to be understood. By following the link in the description, you can access a series of videos on improving your emotional intelligence, which I compiled together with psychologists. We have carefully analyzed each practice so that you can recognize your hidden complexes, understand your true needs, and learn to live in harmony with yourself. In addition, you will get access to financial literacy videos, bonuses in the form of gift promotions, a closed Telegram channel, and, most importantly, a chat for communication by interests, where you can find support and chat on various topics, including with me. And all this is available within one inexpensive subscription. Thus, you not only support the channel, but also invest in your development. And the link will be in the description. If the brain gets used to a certain state, it will seek it out again and again. Because it does not just become habitual, it becomes comfortable and safe. And it's home. Therefore, people who are used to living in chaos unconsciously create it around themselves. Those who are used to suffering find a reason for this, even when everything is fine. Therefore, addictions are not amenable to treatment, but to therapy. Because they cannot be cured, they only go into remission. We can control our actions, but we cannot rewrite the memory of a state when it seemed to us that things were better. Because different people's nervous systems are more sensitive to certain surges and states. And this is already determined at the genetic level. Each of us is formed differently, and how successfully you will become addicted is at the level of your genes. And no, there is no code in the genes that is responsible for the fact that from the mother's womb you will immediately fly for a cigarette. But there are genes that define you. So in our body, there are acetylcholine receptors that trigger a chain of reward reactions when interacting with nicotine. These receptors are encoded by several genes. C-with-3, C-with-5, and others. Everyone has them, but different people may have small mutations in these genes. Some people have more sensitive receptors, while others have higher or lower numbers in activity. That's why one person gets high from smoking, while another doesn't understand the pleasure of smoking at all. The same story with alcohol. When we drink alcohol, we feel relaxed. And here the ADN1B gene comes into play. It breaks down ethyl alcohol into acetaldehyde, an extremely toxic product that causes headaches, nausea, and hangovers. The body tries to neutralize it faster, which is what the ELDN2 gene does. An ordinary person doesn't experience any problems from a small amount of alcohol. But if the gene variations work faster than usual, then a person may practically not feel the feeling of intoxication. And if the first gene works slower, then alcohol circulates in the blood longer, and the feeling of intoxication and euphoria is prolonged. This causes addictions to form very quickly, and the liver suffers more. But if the second gene is slow, which does not neutralize the toxic enzyme, then a person may develop alcohol intolerance. There are many genes, and there are even genes that affect the dopamine system, such as DRD2 or DRD4. They determine how intensely the body reacts to the explosion of the hormone of joy. If a person reacts more sensitively to small fluctuations in dopamine, then he is guaranteed to be endowed with a certain addiction. Smoking, alcohol, gambling, or regular games, drugs like marijuana, sweet drinks, masturbation with pornography. And someone collects everything at once. And this whole excursion into chemistry leads to the fact that everything is as individual as possible. Even coffee does not invigorate about 20% of people because they have a faster metabolism of caffeine. One calmly quits smoking, while another cannot get off for years. To learn about yourself, you need to take a DNA test. Therefore, bad habits cannot be viewed as something unequivocally bad. It is a symbiosis of a large number of things that are usually beyond our control. In addition, not every regular action is an addiction. But you need to understand the difference between I like coffee in the morning and I can't function without it. The difference between I masturbate once a week to relieve stress and I masturbate every day because I feel miserable. And without masturbation, I break down. We need to understand this. We need to study ourselves. And we need to do something about it. The world around us is built on the exploitation of our weaknesses. Big business is actively using this, so our habits are no longer ours. They are no longer with us. For many of us, the ability to choose is a pleasant fiction. Everything around is created in such a way as to trap you. Previously, social networks were made for communication between people. Now, so that you spend as much time as possible on them. Games used to tell stories. Now they take up time. They are no longer about solving, but about storing. Porn cripples the perception of sexuality. Food is stuffed with various garbage to make it tastier. Business has made these addictions socially acceptable. In society, it has become the norm to almost let go of your phone. It is normal when a young guy can watch porn in a few weeks than he will read books in his entire life. No one will say that this is an addiction, because everyone has become like that. Because we have become the product. And here is the main question. If everything around is created to subjugate us, how to resist it? And no, willpower will not help here. They often say, pull yourself together, stop being weak, just stop doing it. But why doesn't the understanding that addiction is harmful to us stop millions of people from doing it? Because willpower doesn't work the way we think. The prefrontal cortex of the brain is responsible for willpower, but its resource is strictly limited. From the field of intellectual tasks, we move on to ordinary things, and it becomes harder for us to make decisions. Of course, rest and healthy sleep restore our resource, and we continue to function. But if we are exposed to prolonged and severe stress, which develops into chronic, the prefrontal cortex is one of the first to suffer. Neural connections are destroyed, cognitive functions are suppressed, and emotional regulation begins to malfunction. Some experiments show this. When a person experiences stress, emotional difficulties, he becomes more passive, less focused, and more prone to compulsive actions. Of course, this does not mean that willpower does not work at all. On the contrary, our ability to choose and control our actions is the basis of our entire life and its success. So, observations show that some people who train self-control, for example, maintaining posture, keeping a diary of income and expenses, by the way, you can download such a table from me with a discount in the description. Over time, they began to better control themselves in other areas of life, including their bad habits. In 1970, psychologist Walter Mischel conducted a marshmallow experiment. Children were offered a choice, to eat one marshmallow right away or to wait 15 minutes and get a double portion. This experiment was repeated many times, and it was found that some people who were able to wait and postpone gratification had a better life. They were less impulsive, achieved more. This skill is very important, and you can develop it in yourself. It's just that when a person is a little stressed and tired, this task becomes more difficult, and it is difficult to rely only on willpower. But in this experiment, it's not so much fate that matters, but how the children controlled themselves. They didn't just endure. They turned away, played with their fingers, closed their eyes, changed their focus of attention. Self-control is not patience, but strategy. Breaking a bad habit doesn't require any effort because it's an automatic cycle. About half of our daily actions are learned brain responses to certain triggers. Therefore, you don't need to fight the bad habit, but replace part of this puzzle, either the trigger or the action. If you don't offer anything in return, the brain will demand a reward at any cost. If you often get stuck on your phone, put it away and put a book next to it. Do you eat fast food? Try cooking it yourself instead of ordering it, or at least buy healthy alternatives. In addition, for the habit to take root, it must be easy. If we want to start reading books, doing sports, We should not read the whole book or run a marathon, but at least do one exercise. Open the book and read a few sentences. And then some more, and some more. When it's really hard, we give up, and when it's easy, it will take root faster and replace our bad habit. Therefore, in the initial stages, useful habits should have a lower threshold for entry and time consumption than harmful ones. And over time, in moments of boredom, we will start reading books, watching lectures, or taking a walk, rather than mindlessly scrolling through our phones. In addition, we should not forget that such actions are behavioral addictions that both appear and change into others. On average, they are formed from several weeks to several months. Therefore, choose the best strategy for yourself to change your leisure time, your behavior, and your efforts will definitely pay off. But what if the problem is not in the habit, not in willpower, and not in the mechanics of actions? The matter is much deeper. The matter is in you. In 1978, Canadian psychologist Bruce Alexander conducted an experiment known as Rat Park. During the experiment, rats were divided into two groups, and each had a choice between plain water and water laced with drugs. The first group of rats was kept in a solitary cell, and the second lived in a space with toys, tunnels, and other rats. The rats kept in solitary conditions very quickly became addicted to the drugged water and often overdosed. And the rats from the other group did not touch the drugged water. Having the same choice, they did not show signs of addiction, being satisfied with the external environment. And what is interesting, the rats from the solitary groups, when they were transferred to a park with everyone else, switched to plain water. Conversely, those who were placed in isolation from society quickly became addicted. Addiction is not just the result of actions or patterns of actions on the brain. It is also a way of compensating for internal deficiencies. It is a distorted realization of our usual need for pleasure and rejection of unpleasantness. This mechanism has saved us from extinction for centuries. The modern world is simply overloaded with temptations. And even living in large metropolises, we feel lonely and isolated. And addictions only fill our emptiness inside. Often, pornography addicts very quickly lose their habit as soon as they enter a healthy relationship, although before that they could have tried to quit for years. Because the previous dose loses its power, because the very reason disappears. Because porn addiction masks loneliness and dissatisfaction. The desire to stay up late on the phone is hidden behind the usual desire to spend more time for yourself and not at work or study. The desire to constantly play games is an escape from the oppressive reality. And sometimes, due to low self-esteem, we simply punish ourselves by continuing to repeat those bad habits that make us worse. Because we believe that if we are losers, then we must suffer. That is, the main strategy is not just to close access to harmful things, but to look at your habits from a different angle. Ask the question, why do we need them? You should not look at it as a weakness. You should look at it as a signal for help. Having given up one thing, we will definitely become dependent on another if we do not work on our needs. You should not get rid of them, but understand what they mean to you. Everyone's answer to this question is different, so you yourself must learn to ask yourself the question, what do you get from this habit? What would you really want? And if you were offered to change this habit to something else, what would you ask for? We are not weak-willed. We are not weak. We just want to be happy. This is what any addiction is built on. Until you understand what you are running away from, you will always be looking for a new dose. Do not try to simply give up the addiction. You cannot eliminate it and live differently, but you can understand what you are running away from. You can stop filling the void and start building a life in which you do not need to hide. Because freedom is not the absence of temptations. Freedom is when you are no longer dependent on them. Let a healthy lifestyle pump yourself and your brain. This is the best and most useful addiction.